So this paper is about what happens if CEOs increase or decrease their use of metaphorical communication when they communicate with intermediaries. And the basic idea is that metaphorical communication has different effects, positive and negative effect, depending on what kind of intermediary these CEOs talk to. And this is really important for the company. The central ideas of our paper is this idea that if you read classical rhetoric and also some modern executive, more popular science that is executive oriented, you find a lot of hints that say, okay, CEOs should use metaphorical communication when they speak to these difficult audiences, including these intermediaries. What is metaphorical communication? Think, for instance, you have two choices, and these choices are described by Cotter in a famous book, Leading Change. And so the first choice is you can say, as a CEO, guys, we need to retain the advantages of economies of great scale and yet become much less bureaucratic and slow in decision making in order to help, and so on and so on. You go on. And the other alternative is, guys, we need to become less like an elephant and more like a customer-friendly Tyrannosaurus Rex. Which alternative would you choose? So if you think about the Tyrannosaurus Rex example, it is not surprising that there is a lot of literature, and when you read more practitioner-oriented sources, but also in rhetoric, classical rhetoric, that suggests CEOs should use and increase their usage of this metaphorical communication when speaking to these difficult audiences, including these intermediaries. Why? Because if you think about it, the Tyrannosaurus Rex example, they steer attention. The idea is that this image basically appears in your mind. Second, metaphorical communication is sticky, so it also you memorize it better than other communication, and it also creates an emotional reaction. If you choose a good metaphor, it also creates a positive emotional connection to the speaker. And so if you think about the challenge of the CEO, which is summarize complex, ambiguous information, steer the attention towards a positive image, a positive assessment, it is not surprising that there has been literature that says, okay, use these metaphorical communication devices. The problem is that there's also literature, especially in cognitive linguistics, that says metaphors are really not so easy. So you have to be careful in using them. Why? Because metaphorical communication is always inherently ambiguous, imprecise. Because think about it. What is a Tyrannosaurus Rex really? There's a lot of you can associate many things with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and there's also this general idea that there might be intermediaries who prefer less precise and more sticky communication, but there might also be intermediaries who actually prefer less sticky, more precise communication. And so there might be these rhetorical dilemmas that the CEO, by using metaphorical communication, might steer some intermediaries to issue less favorable or more favorable evaluations, while at the same time steering other intermediaries to actually issue less favorable evaluations. And that's really important if you think about the importance of these intermediaries. We argue that journalists will increase the favorability of their reporting about companies if the CEO increases her or his usage of metaphorical communication. Why? Because journalists actually grow up in a world where metaphorical communication is a mark of genius, as Aristotle said. And when you learn journalism, many of these journalist textbooks, they also include the usage of metaphors as something that is, a sign of eloquence. And that's, makes a lot of sense, because if you want to land on the first page of a newspaper and grab the attention of a broad Main Street audience, that's more likely if you use these familiar frames. And then the opposite is true for these analysts. The idea is that analysts work in a fact-oriented, number-focused world. And for them, if a CEO uses metaphorical communication, it's actually noise. It's very difficult for an analyst to make sense of a metaphor used by a CEO. So if we think about that, the usage of a metaphor makes it harder for the analyst to do his work, that automatically leads to less, a decrease in favorability. And also, if you think about analysts speak, they use metaphors really seldomly. It's not part of their rhetorical repertoire. And so we come to these diverging responses, so that, as we say, the CEO is in a rhetorical dilemma situation. By using metaphorical communication, he or she, or by increasing this metaphorical communication, he or she might arouse more positive evaluation among the journalists, but more negative evaluations among the securities analysts. So if you read our paper, we hope you find it interesting that we use earnings conference calls as our empirical setting. And the idea is that these earnings conference calls are not just followed by securities analysts, but also by these journalists of these major newspapers. And we basically look at how journalists and how analysts change their assessments prior and after, from before the conference call and after the conference call, depending on the increase or decrease of the degree to which CEOs use metaphorical communication. And perhaps that's a nice element of this paper, the empirical methodology.